Get an in-depth look at the ups and downs of Nickelback's roller coaster career when Hate to Love, Nickelback, comes to the big screen for 2 days only on March 27th and 30th. Book tickets now at nickelbackfilm.com or visit our website to enter to win tickets to a screening near you. DJ and PK, joined now by Ken Pomeroy, college basketball analytics guru, owner of KenPom.com. Ken, good morning.
Good morning, DJ. This is first for me. No PK in the house, so I expect a very straightforward and serious conversation about college basketball.
Well, he's just taking a couple days off. He'll be back Monday, and everything will be back to normal. I love what you did. I'm on your website right now, and you put in a really tiny number next to you. On the left, there's the number ranking every team, 1 through 362, and on the right are the numbers that tell me where these teams were seated. I remember a lot of them, but not all of them. You made it easy. Not everybody does that with their websites, Ken. Congratulations.
I do what I can, DJ. I gotta outwork the competition here to get those subscriptions. So there you go.
There are people putting the selection committee on blast. How bad were they? How poorly did they treat the Mountain West Conference? How much disrespect was there? And how much did they overinflate power conferences? Were you shaking your head at Virginia? What do you think?
Yeah, so here's Ken Pom's view on bracketology in general. Like, the seeding isn't something that I get too concerned about. Sure, they were slightly disrespectful to the Mountain West. The teams, relative to, I guess, what the consensus was out there, teams should have been, seated, 1 or 2 spots higher in general. But in the end, that doesn't make a whole lot of difference, especially when you're in that 6 to 11 range anyway. I mean, all those teams are pretty similar. The thing that I think is way more important is just getting into the field. We've seen teams repeatedly barely get into the field and then make deep runs. So you have to get in the field to do that. And that's the most important part of the selection committee's job. And in that sense, I mean, obviously in retrospect, after what Virginia did on Tuesday night, looks pretty silly that they were in the tournament. And most bracketologists did not have them in the tournament, although some did. It wasn't like an obvious decision, at the time. So it's a little bit of revisionist history here. The real puzzling one was New Mexico, I guess, who seemed, by resume had a strong case to be in the field. And obviously they got in the field because they won the conference tournament. But the way they were seated below every single at-large team. So had they not won the conference tournament, they would not have been in the tournament. And that would have been quite controversial if that scenario had played out. So that's the one that really gets you shaking your head. And, now it's kind of up to them to prove the committee wrong, I guess, because they ended up getting a pretty favorable matchup in drawing Clemson.
When I look at your rankings and I look at a bracket, if I were to take your rankings and use them to pick my bracket, historically, how would I do? How spot on is that? And how much is, hey, it's called March Madness for a reason and no one can do that? Where do you fall on that continuum?
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, it's called March Madness for a reason. Mm-hmm. I mean, you'll do all right. Using my ratings. Like, generally, the team that's higher in my ratings is going to be favored in that matchup. So, from that sense, you'll do fine. But I mean, we understand that the team that's favored does not always win, and especially when you get to this tournament, like, the team that's favored isn't favored by much. That's why the tournament is the way it is. Like, these teams are all pretty close, and you miss a couple shots or make a few more turnovers than normal, you end up losing a game that you should win. I mean, the BYU Duquesne game is a pretty great example of that, where Duquesne is one of the worst 11 seeds in the history of the tournament, and I believe BYU, the last time I checked, was like a 9-point favorite, which they're obviously the favorite, but that's not a huge number. Like, plenty of 9-point favorites lose during the season. So you do well. I think it's the way to use it is as a guide. Like, I mean, to me, it's kind of a boring existence if you just look at the numbers and pick the higher team every time. Like, you might as well have a little fun with it and pick a few upsets. And go with your heart in a few cases. Just don't do that in all cases. And you should have a viable bracket for maybe a couple weeks.
I like to pick against leagues. When you hear about a league being down and a league isn't very good, so if the Pac-12 or the ACC or whatever league you've really soured on this year, pick against those teams. And we don't traditionally pick the play-in games, but that made it fun to pick against Virginia. And look, it worked.
I mean, as someone who has a diploma from Virginia Tech, you're not gonna find me having any sympathy for Virginia loss. So. I mean, that was really, those first 4 games are, I don't think, very memorable normally. And there's been some good ones, but I just think, obviously you're talking about lower seeds and we're not that interested in them. But that game might be one we don't forget for a long time because it was so lopsided and Virginia was so bad. And, I don't have any trouble with that. And it was kind of like, just to add on top of it, how the ACC coaches seem to have this, organized campaign to complain about the Big 12 being so highly rated. I mean, hey, the ACC might salvage it. They got other teams there that are pretty good, but to start off by laying that kind of an egg was pretty hilarious.
I agree. Totally hilarious. Loved it. BYU is ranked 16th in your rankings at KenPom.com. Duquesne is ranked 85th. To my eye and to talking to, we've had a guy on from Duquesne Radio and all that. Duquesne has shooters, but BYU has more shooters. Duquesne has some size, but BYU has more size. BYU has had a problem turning the ball over at times in games, and Duquesne is good at pressuring the perimeter and forcing turnovers. So that would seem to be the Achilles heel for BYU. But all that size and the desire to be the first team to win, first BYU team to win a tourney game in more than a year, if they rebound with energy and size, I got this as the Cougars game. Am I missing anything? Are you on board with all those points? What do you think?
I'm on board with you. Yeah, certainly at first glance. I mean, this is the type of game where if it was played on December 8th at the Marriott Center, you would expect BYU to win by, 23 or something. Obviously it's not. It's played in March and it's played on a neutral site, and Duquesne has finished the season really strong, so you can't just disregard them. But, yeah, between the fact that Duquesne's offense is quite poor from an NCAA tournament standpoint. I mean, they're a team that has to win with defense. So you got that part of it. And then, as you mentioned, the size factor. I mean, they basically play 3 guards, and they're all kind of small. BYU is going to have a height advantage in the backcourt, which I think is, conducive to, having a good day from the 3-point line, which is important. I mean, I heard you talking earlier, and it's obviously not critical in this game because, again, Duquesne's not going to score a lot of points, you wouldn't think. So you don't need to be typical, hot 3-point shooting team to pull this off. But I think the potential's there for that to happen anyway. The one item to give a little pause in this game, and really I think BYU's future in this tournament, is that, I mean, we've already seen it with the Virginia game we mentioned. If you watched the Colorado Boise State game last night, these games get a lot more lower scoring in the tournament. Shooting gets worse in the tournament. At least in the last 2 years it has. And some speculation because they use a different brand of basketball in the tournament that nobody's used to, that plays a role. But regardless of the reason, that would be a slight concern for me. Not necessarily in this game, but going forward, that could be an issue. So just something to keep in the back of your mind there.
You got BYU at 16, Illinois at 10. Assuming that the seeds hold in the second round, what kind of shot do you give the Cougars of getting to the Sweet 16?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is that a potential BYU-Illinois game, probably the most entertaining game of the second round. Illinois, the complete opposite of Duquesne. They are really skilled offensively and are not super committed to the defensive end, to put it politely.
They're not
barely
super
ranked in the top 100. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's been a theme for them all year. So that's a game that should be, as NCAA tournament games go, should be pretty high scoring. The one interesting aspect of that game is that Illinois is committed to whatever extent they are committed on the defensive end. They are committed to taking away the 3-point shot. So, BYU is one of the very few teams in the country that took more threes than twos. I think two teams in the country did that. That will not happen against Illinois. They will have to figure out a way to score. I mean, they'll still get some threes up. That's what they do, but they will be taking fewer threes than usual. They will be taking more twos. So that kind of adds a different twist to that game. I mean, I think BYU can adjust to that, but the Illinois game will be a much bigger challenge than the Duquesne game, to say the least. Like, yeah, you're going to have to score inside the 3-point line. You're going to be facing better athletes, longer players. BYU traditionally struggles with that in the tournament, and you'd expect them to struggle with that in this case. And again, it doesn't mean that they can't pull it off. Illinois is not the strongest defensive team, so points will be scored. It'll be an entertaining game, but a difficult one to win.
You got TCU at 35 in your rankings. You've got Utah State at 47 at KenPom.com. That feels like a toss-up game, and presumably number 1 seeded Purdue would be waiting in the second round. Purdue has lost to double-digit seeds 3 years in a row, which is quite the accomplishment, losing to teams seeded 13, 15, and 16. They are 2-3 in the tournament the last 3 years. The monkey on their back, oh my gosh, the pressure they'll feel if a game starts to slip away at any point in this tournament. Who wins the TCU-Utah State game, and what shot do you give them of sending Purdue home early, again?
That region is pretty fascinating, by the way. You got Purdue as the 1 and Tennessee as the 2, and you look at head coaches with any sort of track record in the NCAA tournament and how they kind of fared relative to what you'd expect given their seed. And the 2 worst over time have been Matt Painter and Rick Barnes, and they're the 1 and 2 seed in that region. But I guess this TCU team, they're a little hard to figure out. There's statistically they're fine. They had a fine year in the Big 12. They're not. It's not like they do something obviously great or obviously poor. They're 45th on offense, 32nd on defense. I guess the one thing I will say is that they are a good offensive rebounding team, and that's something that Jamie Dixon has really emphasized throughout his career. So it's not a great shooting team, but they get more chances on the offensive glass, and so that's something to watch for the Aggies. The Aggies have been a decent defensive rebounding team, and if they can keep TCU off the glass, that will really help their cause. But yeah, difficult matchup just from the standpoint that TCU is they got Big 12 size. They got size and strength and in ways that Utah State didn't quite face night in, night out. Not that the Mountain West is lacking in that substantially, but just to some degree that that's going to take a little bit of an adjustment for the Aggies. If they do, I hope they get by, because I think that the matchup between Utah State and Purdue is a little more interesting than TCU and Purdue, just simply because of what will happen in the middle. I mean, obviously Zach Edey is awesome and amazing, and I don't expect Great Osobor to have his way with Zach Edey by any means, but Edey and Osobor are 2 of the most prolific players in the country in terms of drawing fouls. So I don't know if you can get Zach Edey into foul trouble. He has basically avoided that amazingly well all year. But if you can get him into foul trouble, that changes things a little bit. So that's where if Utah State was going to pull off the unthinkable, that's, I think, how it would start.
All right, we'll let you go on this one. San Diego State and Florida Atlantic wrecked a lot of brackets last year. Who was the team seeded somewhat modestly, but you think, if chalk is boring, you like to pick outliers, you would pick a team or two you would pick to make a deep run and surprise everybody?
Well, I don't know if this qualifies, but, I mean, Auburn, obviously, look at my ratings, DJ, and they're the 4th-ranked team, and they're a 4 seed.
Yep.
They're not in the best bracket to do that. They actually have to go through San Diego State probably, and then UConn in the Sweet 16. So not the path you necessarily wanted to see. But if you're entering a pool or whatever, most people are going to be picking UConn to go to the Final Four, and most people are going to be picking them to win it all. So if you're looking for a contrarian pick to set yourself apart, I think Auburn is an interesting team. They've had their way with lesser competition this year, and they've actually performed pretty well against top competition as well. They play up tempo, but they have a legitimate defense, and they're a team that I think legitimately could give UConn some trouble. They also have a great center in terms of Janai Broom, who could muck things up with Donovan Clingan a little bit. So the matchup, if it comes to that, I think would be a lot more interesting than people might think just looking at the season.
I knew you might go Auburn because I had looked at your rankings, and it jumps right out at you to see them number 4 with a 4 seed. But the other place I thought you've got, and you've hinted about this, is that I thought you were going to say Creighton or Gonzaga because Purdue at 1 and Tennessee at 2 are trouble, and number 4 Kansas doesn't have their leading scorer. So if you want to reach, the 3 seed's Creighton, the 5 seed is Gonzaga. I guess you go to South Carolina at 6, but it's kind of dicey to pick a 6 seed to go to the Final Four. They do it, but it's pretty dicey.
Yeah, so Creighton is an interesting one. You're right. You picked 2 there, Creighton and Gonzaga. I mean, Gonzaga's got things kind of teed up pretty nicely. Actually, if you really want to go off the board, I would consider Oregon, honestly. I mean, it's really strong.
An 11 seed to the Final Four.
Yeah, hey, I'm saying if you really want to go off the board.
Because that's New Mexico. That's New Mexico all over. They're a bid thief. They weren't going to get in. The 10 seeds are the last at larges, and Oregon was given an 11 as the tournament champ.
Correct. Yeah, they would not have gotten in, but they're able to win the Pac-12 tournament, and not just that, but much like New Mexico, kind of got teed up with a really favorable first-round matchup. Against the South Carolina team that is seeded appropriately based on resume, but almost all of their wins were close, regardless of who they beat, whether it was a quality team or not a quality team. And so that spells a team that's quite vulnerable. So Oregon really has a shot certainly to win that first game. I do like Creighton. I think they're a little bit, they've had really one of the most vanilla seasons you can possibly have. I think they started like 12th in my ratings and finished 11th, and they never really deviated from that a lot. It wasn't a up and down type of season. It's a team that has very similar players that they've had the last 2 years. And so I think they get forgotten a little bit, but they're capable of making a run as well. I mean, I do think to the extent you're going to see, somebody come from way off the board and get to the Final Four or get to the Elite Eight or something like that, it will happen in that region.
He's Ken Pomeroy, KenPom.com. How do you usually do with your brackets? Usually crush it, or like everyone else, the madness consumes your predictions as well?
Well, here's a secret that's going to just totally ruin your day, DJ. But, I actually rarely do a bracket just because the website is the bracket,
Yeah, there it is.
I get
that.
Judged by my ratings, and so some years it goes well, and some years it doesn't. But
there you go.
if it went well every year, I'd be ruining the fun for everybody. So we kind of want the wacky years, right?
100%. Yeah. I tell people all the time, you got that prediction wrong when you picked that winner. I said, yeah, I know. Isn't it great? If you know what's going to happen before it happens, what are you watching sports for? That's the whole fun of it, is not knowing what's going to happen. It's the madness in the March that makes the magic. We'll finish with that alliteration. I did that accidentally, but I kind of liked it.
That was outstanding.
Thank you. All right, Ken, we appreciate it as always. You're the man. Maybe we'll talk to you deeper in the tournament. Love having you on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, DJ.
Ken Pomeroy, college basketball analytics guru and owner of KenPom.com. Andy Bailey, NBA writer for Bleacher Report. More hoops next. Stay with us.